Greetings and welcome to Unit 1, Introduction to Texas History and Politics. So let's begin by me asking you a question. Have you ever thought about why politics is so different from Texas compared to California, or Mississippi compared to New York, or Texas and Louisiana? Have you ever thought about those differences and why it seems like we are so different? Yep, we are, especially in national elections, we try to speak as one. Political scientists, we have thought about this question. We're trying to understand why we do what we do and the differences between what we do in one region from another. So in this video, we're going to examine Daniel Elzar's 3 forms of political culture, which helps us to understand these regional differences. And we're going to discuss how these cultural differences between the states can shape attitudes about the role of government and citizen participation. And we're going to look at the main criticisms of Elzar's theory. So without any further delay, let's dive into this. Okay, so I love to begin with definitions, right? So we're on the same page here. Right, so what are we talking about? What is political culture? Well, it is the attitudes and beliefs about the functions and expectations of government. Yes, expectations of government. When we can think about, right, when we consider the 2 major political parties, Democrats and Republicans, when we consider these two, right, ultimately they are trying to do what they believe is best for the nation. Whether it's Democrats or Republicans, they're both trying to do what they think is best and what they think government should do. Expectations and the role of government. It differs. It differs among political parties, it differs among ideology, and yes, regionally. Different regions within the United States, we think about these expectations and these roles that government play very differently, right? Like, take someone from Texas, compare them to some place like Massachusetts, for example. We have different thoughts and thought processes regarding the role and the function of government. And you can imagine that this is a source of conflict's not the word I want to use, but this is a source of frustration when we talk about politics. When we disagree on a political issue and trying to come to a consensus, that's kind of hard to do when we have these differing regional differences. I'm digressing. Let's move on. Right. So, is there a difference, though, in these regions and how to think about politics? Well, the answer is yes. Yes, we do think about things differently, right? Consider Texas for a moment, right? Think about our identity here, right? That we take, especially in the context of justice, we kind of think of justice, as almost like the wild, wild west. This type of situation where we want to take justice into our own hands. So we like to see, harsh punishments for violating the law. Now compare that to a state like California, for example, who's a little more, no, relaxed isn't the word I want to use. But for example, they don't have the death penalty. Or they don't carry it out, let me put it that way. So it's how do we explain these differences? Let's dive into these political cultures and how political scientist Daniel Elzar's approach and his theory to this. And my apologies, you may be hearing my cat in the background. he can get a little vocal. Anyways, okay, so political scientist Daniel Elzar, in 1966, he came up with this theory that the United States could be divided into 3 distinct political cultures. That is, moralistic political culture, individualistic political culture, and traditionalistic political culture. that these three distinct values, right? Our values influence our beliefs about the role of government and even our civic participation. Yes, that these values that we hold, right? They do shape, they do change, and they have a impact on how we think about government and how we, in even our political participation, right? I mean, consider for one moment those who think of voting as an essential, not only as an essential right, but as a civic duty, right? Doesn't matter if it's raining, if it's cold, if it's hot, if it's thunderstorms, right? Tornadoes, hurricanes, we will vote simply because it's our civic duty. Versus those who may have more of a relaxed approach, who that if it's an inconvenience, like if there's a long line, I don't have to vote this time, right? That has an impact, and our political culture helps us understand that type of behavior. So, at least according to his theory. So let's continue on. So the diffusion of these cultures, that is, as we've seen more people move, right? As we're seeing people from like Texas moving into Colorado, and people from California moving to Texas, and people from Massachusetts. For whatever reason, they like to go into Florida. No jab, but Florida is just so extreme, temperature-wise. More on that later. Anyways, so as we see people moving across the United States, right, we are seeing this diffusion of these political cultures. We're seeing some mixing of these different political cultures, right? And this occurs when people migrate, and there are a host of reasons why we move. There's a host of reasons, and we're going to get into some of those towards the end, right? I mean, just a little teaser real quick. Right, we could think about, weather-related reasons. Maybe I like it colder or hotter, or, maybe there's a educational opportunity or an economic opportunity that can explain why we move as much as we do. Again, more on that a little bit towards the end, but we will touch back on this thought. Let's continue. So, characteristics of this moralistic political culture. Coming back to this, right? So, some characteristics. The first one here is a means to a better society. That is, government is a means to a better society, and it has a responsibility to promote the general welfare. See, that's one of these characteristics, that government is intended. The purpose of government, the function of government, is to better society and promote the general welfare of the society. So that's one characteristic. Another is that there is an expectation, right, that elected officials are to be honest with the voters, are to be honest with the public, and to commit to improving the area. Whether we're talking about a municipality, whether we're talking about a county government, or if we're talking about the state. The idea that elected officials are going to be honest, there is an expectation of honesty, on top of they are committed to improving the area, whatever the area may be. Right? And expanded role of government, right? So if there's a expectation, right, to improve the area, if government is a means to a better society, then you can imagine that the role of government is larger, right? So they allocate funding for the increasing size, and they advocate for new programs to help with promoting the general welfare of society within that state, right? So these are the three main characteristics of moralistic. And by the way, before I forget to mention, there are some examples, right? Some states, some examples of this. We have Colorado, Kansas, Utah, North Dakota, South Dakota, California, etc. So we have plenty of states to sample, if you will, of this moralistic political culture. let's move on. So, political participation, how is it valued within this particular type of political culture? Well, I'm so glad. I'm so glad you asked. Well, there's more participation, right? There's more political participation. Voters are more likely to participate in elections and within the civic process as a whole. They're more involved, right? Since government is a means to better society, then people would like to have their voices heard. They're not so cynical about the process as a whole. They want to engage because they want to make sure that their issues, that their concerns are addressed by the state legislature, by local officials, by government. Since they have it in them, since the mindset is set that government is a means to a better society. I know I'm hammering this pretty hard, but you see the connection here, right? You see the connection between this how one thinks about what government should be, and that connection to our participation. It's interesting. Let's continue. So state laws make it easier for people to participate. In these states with this moralistic political culture, we see states adopt easier, relaxed, compared to other states, voting laws, such as same-day voter registration, for example, or easier access to ballot with absentee voting, or things like that. Not to say that they have no voter laws whatsoever. Not the case. States have adopted voter laws. We'll get a little more into that when we talk about federalism, but just note that conducting elections is a responsibility that the states possess. No, I take it back. I think we're going to get into the elections chapter, but I'm digressing. Point is that states have adopted rules, regulations, laws dictating and guiding and regulating state elections. That being said, though, states, since they do differ in the approach how government is supposed to behave in what role they serve, right? We see states that adopt a little more relaxed, like I say, same-day voter registration, online voter registration, and things like that. Right? So state laws are intended to make it easier for people to participate rather than make it more difficult. More on that later. Let's move on. And public service is valued. Yes. So here, with this moralistic political culture, what we see is that public service, people who do this type of job, who is in politics representing some type of constituency, that yes, public service, that they are valued, and that this is it's a full-time job, and they are compensated for that. So, which leads to heightened competitive. We see a more competitive elections, for example. So, heightened competition among candidates, among political parties. We don't really necessarily see one political party dominating the other, or should I say dominating the state legislature, for example. There's more political competition among the political parties and the specific candidates as a whole. So we see more participation. We see laws are a little more relaxed to encourage voter participation, civic participation, and we see that public service is valued, and with that comes more competition. Let's move on. So, moralistic political culture is developed among the Puritans in New England, right? Moved westward and values diffused. That is, as people migrated, as people moved among the country, across the top of the country, that is, we see this diffusion, exchanging of ideas, if you will, right? Scandinavians and Northern Europeans joined that reinforced the held values of the Puritans, right? So this reinforcement of this approach that government is a means to a better society, right? They push further west along the west coast. So we see a lot of this moralistic political culture in the central northern United States and among the west coast. Let's continue on. So individualistic political culture, right? So the characteristics. So we're moving away from moralistic now into the individualistic. So let's take a look at this. Some characteristics, right? Government is a mechanism for addressing the issues for individuals, right? Government is a mechanism for addressing issues for individuals, right? So there is this because of that function, that role, the expectation that they have of government. There tends to be a marketplace interaction, right? That is to say that government is to provide goods and services to address those issues for individuals, right? Public officials are compensated for their efforts, right? This idea that if an elected official is right, if they are addressing the needs of the constituency, then they should be compensated for their work, right? That type of idea. Participate only if they have a personal interest. We see here with this individualistic that people are only motivated to vote, motivated to get involved, motivated to engage politically if they have a personal interest at stake. So more tolerance of corruption, and they do not view the profession as a notable profession. That is to say that there's a sense of skepticism for elected officials, right? We might actually be able to relate to that here in Texas, right? This idea that words are cheap, right? But I'm digressing. We'll get to Texas. But this idea that it's not a noble profession, right? So there's a little more tolerance of corruption among the states, right? Electoral competition is among party lines, which results in less attention to individuals, increased loyalty to political parties, and less tolerant of third parties. So what we see here is domination of a political party, right? Because we see this increased loyalty to parties, right? Again, we might be able to recognize a little bit of that here in Texas, but this increased loyalty to parties and less tolerant of third party candidates. So that's a little bit of that coincides with this idea that government elected officials is not a noble profession. We see this connection here. So let's move into traditionalistic political culture. Okay, let's dive into this, a different one here. Right? So characteristics necessary to maintain existing social order or the status quo. Have you ever wondered why some states are very proactive with, name any given political issue, right? Some states are willing to act fast. Other states, not so much. Right? So government is necessary to just maintain the status quo, maintain the current existing social order. So what does that mean? What is the status quo? Well, take a look around, right? What is the current law? And then just maintain that. Do not change it for any reason. Right? That's keeping the status quo, right? So we don't see much change, if you will. We don't see much policy change because of this idea of, just keeping that CONT status, like just keeping that CONT existing social order, and there's no need to change it. This idea, if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of mentality, type of attitude. So only elites belong in political enterprise. Only those who are considered elites. And that is my other cat you're hearing playing with their toys. I'm digressing. Let's get back to this. So only elites belong in political enterprise. So only those who are well educated, those who are business people, those who are only those who are involved, actively involved, should be participating in politics. Only they deserve to be voters. Only they deserve to be participants. Only they are the ones who are supposed to judge and make these laws for the state. Right? Kind of you probably have gotten the hint here, right? Texas, we're a little bit of a mixture here, but we favor more of this traditionalistic approach. More on that in a moment. Right? So, new public policies advanced only if they reinforce the already currently held beliefs and interests of those in power. Let me say that again. Okay? That new public policies, that is, i.e., new laws, new legislation, are advanced within the legislature only if they reinforce the currently held beliefs and advances the interest of those in power. Now, that's kind of a cynical point of view, is it not? I mean, isn't it? The only reason to vote is to hopefully have an impact, but what good is it going to do anyways if my vote's only going to, if only legislation is going to be done if it advances their specific interest? Right? This can get pretty cynical pretty fast, and that's not where I want to go with this. Where I want to go is try to understand and try to explain why we behave the way that we do. Why do Texas, why do these other states, why do we behave politically the way that we do? So, kind of cynical. Some examples of this traditionalistic political culture, by the way: Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona, New Mexico, Louisiana, pretty much the entire South here in the United States. Yeah, so we see this traditionalistic political culture. Southern United States, again, the result of slavery, political participation was a privilege reserved only for those who met the qualifications. And we're going to dive into these qualifications. We're going to take a look at history, not in this lecture video, but in another lecture. We're going to take a look at some of those barriers to political participation. Right? But as a result of slavery, we're looking at here in the South, specifically, I'm referring to the Civil War here, that political participation was a privilege and it was reserved for a certain few. Right? And if you didn't meet those qualifications, whatever those qualifications were, arbitrarily established, well, then this isn't for you. That was the mentality, at least back then. And we can still see some of that today with this idea that only elites should participate. Only those who are well educated, who know these political candidates, who know the political issues, who know every single thing that's on the ballot, only they should participate. I can't count how many times I've ran into that type of mentality. That, well, no, and you may be that way as well. That you may hold the attitude that, well, I don't know everything. I don't know everything there is to know about politics. I don't know if I should have a voice here. You should. You really should. And let me be clear about this, right? I love this stuff. Okay, I love politics. I love political science. But do I know everything there is to know? No. I'm just going to be real here. Okay, I don't. Do I know every candidate? No. Especially, I don't know him personally. So, but I do have a voice, and it should be heard. Like you have a voice, and your voice should be heard. More on this when we get to voting, but just kind of pausing here and kind of injecting, giving a little teaser for future videos and future discussions. I'm digressing. Let's move on. So low voter participation, low voter turnout, low voter participation. We see more barriers erected by the state to keep voters from participating. And look no further than what we've done here in Texas with banning 24-hour voting here in the Houston area. Look no further than banning drive-through voting as well. These extra barriers or these restrictions to voter access, right? Now, we could argue, right? There's arguments on both sides here, right? That one says it's a barrier, the other would say that it's a mechanism, or removing a mechanism, or it's a mechanism to prevent voter fraud. Regardless where we stand on this issue, right? To removing 24-hour voting does, for those who work night shifts, right? So those who might go to work at night and who sleep in the day, right? For those, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. polling doesn't work for them for their life. So that eliminating 24-hour voting hinders nurses, hearts, doctors, and their opportunity, their ability to go to the polling place to vote, right? So whether we see it as a mechanism to help voter fraud, or we see it as a barrier to voter participation, what we gotta think of is just the impact of what kind of impact does it have on individuals who have the right to use their voice, like you do, like I do, right? I'm digressing. Party participation between factions within a dominant party. This is where we see complete and utter domination of political parties. Right? Here in Texas, for example, we were dominated for well over 100 years by the Democrat Party. Yes, I said that right, the Democrat Party. And then it wasn't until about 2000 where the Republicans started dominating all state elected offices, and we see it trickle down throughout the counties as well. So we like being dominated. We prefer having one dominant party in power here in Texas. Right? So what we see, rather than political competition among Democrats and among Republicans, we are starting to see, we see instead factions within the parties. Or specifically here in Texas, we see factions developing and conflicting with each other and trying to have a louder voice within the Republican Party, right? So, and party factions do exist, by the way. For example, within the Republican Party, there is a faction that respects and advocates for the LGBTQ community. You wouldn't think that by just looking at the platform, perhaps, looking at the rhetoric, listening to what the candidates are saying, and paying attention to what's happening in the legislature. But there is a faction that does advocate for their rights. So that's fascinating, right? Just like within the Democrat Party, there is a faction, there is a group of people who advocate for pro-life. Regarding abortion, right? This idea of whether you think of it as a pro-choice issue, or in that is to say that the women's right to choose, or whether that's the the government has a right to protect the rights of the unborn child. Regardless where we stand on that, right? There is a faction within the Democrat Party that are opposed to one another, and we see that. We see it here in Texas. So we see these factions developing and conflicting with one another within the party. So within the Democrat Party, there are factions that are trying to dominate, if you will. There are factions within the Republican Party that are differing on ideas and opinions about politics and trying to get trying to dominate that party. So we see that. I'm digressing again. That's my favorite word, digressing. Anyways, so Democrats dominated the South until realignment. We saw the change around night. Scholars are going to argue about this, and we do. When did realignment happen? I would argue that realignment happened around 1945, where we saw Democrats at the national level embracing civil rights. We're starting to see them embracing equal rights, equal opportunity for everyone. So when we saw that at the national level, and I would say the triggering point was the executive order signed by Truman that desegregated our military. Yes, our military used to be segregated up until about 1940. I think it was 1946 or could have been 1940. I can't remember the exact year off the top of my head, so don't quote me on that. But he signed an executive order that desegregated our military. And I would say that's the triggering point where we're starting to see the Democrats realign. Or we're starting to see this realignment between the two political parties, I should say. So, moving on. So, Texas political culture, we're a bit of a mix. We truly are. Just like Texas, we are special here, right? We are a mixture between traditional and individual political cultures. And we kind of see that. We kind of saw that, right? We comparatively low voter turnout we have low voter turnout than most other states. We see that Texans view political participation as an economic perk versus the value of contributing to society or that civic duty of going to vote. And so we're a mixture. So let's talk about some criticisms real fast of Elzar's theory here, right? Changes in immigration patterns. So immigration, right? We have seen this. If we take a look at U.S. history, right? We can see that we've had immigration patterns for a very, very long time. At first, we had a strong immigration from Europe, and that has shifted, that has changed to more Latin American and Asia. So we're seeing more different ideas coming from different places of the world. And that is a awesome and good thing, by the way. If everyone thought the same, by the way, this place would be boring. Can we be honest about that? I'm digressing. So the question is for us, do these three cultures still match the reality for which we live in? Right? Given that immigration patterns have changed, that we have more people from Latin America and Asia migrating to the United States, we're seeing more of a mixing pot here in the United States. Do these three current political cultures, do they match our reality? And that's a question for you to consider, right? That's a question for you and I to consider as individuals. Let me know what you think, right? Does this help explain how we operate, or is there something missing? Right? Let's move on with these critiques. Right? Transportation make it easier for people to relocate. More people are relocating for various reasons. And there are a host of reasons why people move, why people migrate, why people move from Texas to California, California to Texas, Texas to Colorado, Massachusetts to Florida, Florida to Massachusetts, Texas to Florida, Florida to Texas. There are a host of reasons, right? there's no, and we can summarize this real quick by saying there are no predictable pattern. Just like a cat. Just like a cat, there's no predictable pattern here for us to pinpoint. Because we move for various reasons. Right? And let's talk about those reasons. People migrate for more than simple economic reasons. I mean, sure, yes. People do move from one region to another or, across the state like I did for a job, right? Yes, that is true. But there's more than just simple economics involved. There are social issues, right? And these issues range from abortion, marriage rights, legalization of marijuana, gun rights, healthcare, voting rights, education, climate control, or should I say climate change rather than climate control. Anyways, there are a host of reasons for this, right? A host of reasons. So these social issues can be one. Another issue is as simple as weather. Yes, weather. We move for weather. Some of us like it cold. Some of us like it hot. Some of us, we don't ever want to face a hurricane ever again. Some of us, we don't want to face a tornado ever again, right? So we move for reasons that have nothing to do with politics, right? Education, right? You might move temporarily out of a state to attend a college, to attend a university. And you might find yourself living in that state post-graduation, right? Maybe you got accepted into a graduate school that you're going there to that state. I know many friends that are in this position. They're from another state, but they're here in Texas to pursue the doctorate degree, for example. Urban versus rural lifestyles, okay? So some of us, we love the city. Some of us, we love the rural area. I've lived in both, right? So I feel like I have a lot to say here. But the urban area, right? Cities, traffic, congestion, construction, living so close to your neighbors, that may be appealing to you. But I know plenty of people that is the last thing they ever want. Right, is to have to deal with traffic or to deal with the amount of people. Right? So for some of us, we may hate the Houston traffic so much, we are willing to move, to more of a rural area or maybe to more of a suburb area of the Houston area. But you get my point. And likewise, maybe you're tired of the rural area. Maybe you're tired of living away, a football field away from your neighbors, or maybe you want to live closer. When I lived out in the rural area, the nearest grocery store was 20 minutes away, 20-minute driving, distance-wise. Not there was no traffic. Traffic jam where I'm from is like 4 cars in front of you, 4. So anyway, the point I'm trying to get at is for some that lifestyle specific they like, others they don't. Right? And it's vice versa here, vice versa. So, is it possible to actually quantify culture? It's unlike economics, unlike demographics. Culture is an abstract concept, and because of that, it's kind of difficult to put out to quantify it, quantify. Yeah, I said it right. To quantify it, it's really difficult to do. So, begs the question. I started this video with asking you a question, or should I say this lecture. Let me end this lecture with another question. Do you buy Elazar's argument? Do you buy his theory? Let me know. So, with that said, well, let's wrap this up. And we've looked at political cultures. We've looked at how political participation differs based upon our expectation and role that government should play. We've taken a look at some criticisms, some criticisms of Elazar's theory. We've looked at, political code. We looked at why we migrate across states. Right? Let me know what you think. With that said, we'll catch you next time.